that now.
Thank you. And hopefully you're seeing my slides there.
Yep, all good.
Great. So jump past that. I will talk to this in a second, but I think that was a really, really good session for a number of reasons there with Gareth just chatting through that site before we kicked off with the content. In flicking through the assignments, and one of our markers is going to be working on those shortly. I think people really did quite well in getting their head around likelihood and generally severity. Exposure, I was actually pretty impressed with this group's ability to get their head around that, but still a few people just struggling a little bit on understanding exposure to crashes. And I think the discussion we just had there was good, but in my next slides, as I help you build something like this, I think you'll get more clarity in terms of exposure. Of course, we'll have our break in about half an hour or so. Okay, so this is kind of the end product or part of the end product of the first part of a safe system audit, which is the sort of safe system assessment. You're getting a general idea of how well the project you're looking at aligns with safe system principles. So it could be a design that you're looking at and you're saying, okay, how good is this project in terms of those objectives we've got in getting us to an elimination of death and serious injury and doing the best we possibly can in terms of reduction of exposure and likelihood and severity. And what we end up with is this kind of graph. This is what people are often looking for to get a quick gauge on how well things are going. And I talked to you a little bit about this last time, but I'm going to go through it and then we're going to build this essentially. But we'll talk about this as, sorry, I just went back accidentally. Don't count that Wally again. Same Wally. We'll call it safe system assessment crash risk. The lower the scores are, the better. The lower the bars on this chart, the better. And what we've got here are crash types: run-off road, head-on, intersection, pedestrians, cyclists, motorcyclists. And then we've got this other crash category. And the other crash category is really anything that's not adequately been picked up as part of those other crash types. Now, when we look at these crash types, these three are associated with vehicles. Any crash where a pedestrian is the one that's injured will be accounted for in this. Anything that a cyclist is injured accounted for here, and a motorcyclist that's injured is accounted for here. So if, for example, a pedestrian is crossing the road at an intersection, like the one we looked at with Gareth there, crossing the road at the intersection, okay, but we're worried about the pedestrian there, and they're going to be the one that's injured, that'll be accounted for here. Okay, not the intersection. If a vehicle was to run off the road and there was a bus stop or something, and you were worried, so this is all, you're predicting these crashes. They've done a run-off road into a bus shelter and you're worried about pedestrians waiting at the bus shelter. Again, that's a pedestrian related, it's accounted for here. Now, if you're worried about the injuries to the occupants of the vehicle when they ran off the road and they hit the bus shelter, that would be accounted for here. So I hope that makes sense. Just trying to clarify that a little bit. Also, if a vehicle runs off the road in an intersection and strikes the signal poles or the or power poles or the like, that's run-off road again, even though it happened within the vicinity of an intersection. Intersection crashes are where vehicles are crossing and they crash, or where there's a turn and sort of a right turn against type crash, or I suppose, right through type crashes. You've got to have that actual intersection crash. So it's very much the same as sort of crash coding that some of you will be quite familiar with. If it's a pedestrian crash, you code it as a pedestrian crash. So what we see here, though, is the first thing we do is put scores to the existing road environment, even though they've given you a design to look at. The red here represents the existing road environment, what's currently there, not what they're planning to build, what's currently there. And you score it. Then you take the design, and in this case, they've given 3 options. One option is to build a roundabout. One option is a modified T with a set of traffic signals, and the other is a standard T intersection with traffic signals. And so I'm using this example again to really sort of clarify this. And you then score each one. So you score the roundabout, and you can see it's doing better in a lot of these cases, but not doing better for cyclist crashes. And then you do the modified T, and you do the same thing. You look at it, it's the light blue, and then the gray is the T intersection. So you can see there you sort of build this map of risk for different scenarios or different options that they provide you. So let's go through how we actually get to those scores. So I started with the end product, so you can see what we're trying to build to. But as I briefly gave you an introduction to last time, we use this safe system matrix. So this is the start of a safe system audit. And we look at exposure and likelihood and severity. So you can see why we're getting that practice on it in your little assignment. And for runoff road crashes, the exposure is basically dictated by the volume of vehicles going through the area. The number of vehicles going through the area dictates the exposure to any that leave the road. Head-on crashes is the same. Intersection crashes is generally the same. It's the AADT, except for you have to add the AADT of each approach. Okay, so add those. Put a little plus sign to remind us to add. Other, we'll say AADT if we're thinking about crashes involving vehicles, such as sideswipe crashes, crashes with animals, maybe crashes at level crossings, rail level crossings or the like. But it could be other things in there. If you were thinking about pedestrians, e-scooters, or other particular road users. But pedestrians are the number of pedestrians crossing or walking through the area. The number of cyclists is for cyclists, and the number of motorcyclists going through the area. But you don't just put down, say, the AADT. If you had an AADT of, say, 3,000 for the road, you wouldn't put 3,000. You need to go to the scoring reference sheet, which is straight out of Austroad's Safe System Assessment Framework, but it contains scores from 0 all the way up to 4. And you can see there at a 4, it says here, volumes of vehicles that might be involved in a particular crash type are very high, or the road is very long. Therefore, exposure is very high. Okay, and then it brings it back to something that we can tangibly use here. For runoff road, head-on, and other crash types, AADT is greater than 10,000 vehicles a day. For cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcycle crash types, volumes are greater than 100 units per day. So if we've got traffic volumes or sort of, general ideas on traffic volumes, we simply are able to go to this scoring reference sheet and see if it fits in with a 4, is it greater than 10,000? We say, oh, no, it's not. Well, let's go down to the next one. What do we see? For run-off road, head-on, and other crash types, ADT is between 5,000 and 10,000 vehicles a day. Pedestrians, cyclists, motorcycles, 50 to 100 units a day. Okay, so we've got another category there. And we said, what did we say, 2,000 or 3,000? So it's not in that. Let's go to the next one, a 2. AADT is between 1,000 and 5,000. Great, okay. So that gives us a 2. It's actually going to give us a 2 for head-on as well. The only way you'd change between these would be if there was some concrete median barrier in between the two lanes. So a head-on was virtually impossible. Then you would make that actually a 0. I hadn't even got to 0 yet, but most of the time it's going to be the same. So if we go back to here and look at what a 0 says, there is no exposure to a certain crash type. This might mean that there is no side flow or intersecting road, no cyclists, no pedestrians, or no motorcyclists. So literally, if you were doing a mid-block section of road, there are no intersections, your intersection exposure would be 0. Or if you were doing a motorway and cyclists were banned and you were very, were confident cyclists weren't using this or weren't going to use this, then you could say 0 for exposure of cyclists. Now, if you're doing a motorway and you maybe like once a year or once every couple of years, some Dutch backpacker gets off a plane and rides, puts their bike together and rides it down the motorway to get to somewhere. That to me is not enough to warrant triggering in this exposure. I will deal with that later in the safe system audit as a specific, it's not a systemic risk. It's an isolated, unique risk, if that makes sense. So I'll deal with that in a certain separate way. So we go through and maybe if we said 2,000 vehicles or 3,000 vehicles a day on one road, and then we had another, got to an intersection, there was 3,000 on this crossroad, then we would add those. We go 3,000 and 3,000, and we go to our scoring reference sheet, and we'd say, well, actually now that's gone from 2 up to 3 because it's now 6,000. So we put a 3 there. And then we ask ourselves, well, how many pedestrians are there? How many pedestrians are sort of crossing or using this area? And it might be an area which is very low with pedestrians, and we sort of get the occasional people through the area, but it's very low. It might be then a 1, somewhere down around 10 people a day in the area, or it might be very busy up at sort of 100 units per day. Now, 100 is not a lot, and so a lot of urban areas get that. Certainly your town centres and any city environments are triggering a 4 for pedestrians in terms of exposure. And I'll finish off the exposure line, then I'll check for questions. I'll check what the time is as well, yeah. So, if you had a very small handful of pedestrians, you might give it a 1. And cyclists, the occasional cyclist through there, but not much, it might get a 1. And motorcyclists tend to be about 1% of AADT. If you had motorcycle numbers, that'd be good, but I'm going to put a sort of 1% there. And so you'd be thinking about the intersection, because this is trying to cover motorcyclists that be crashing at intersections, head-on crashes, run-off road. So we'll be taking a 3 there for motorcyclists as well, because they sit in that categorization down here. Motorcycles, pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists. So then you're able to put some scores there. As I say, other crashes, if we're thinking of something like sideswipe crashes, let's put a 2 there. Is the main other crash category we've got a bit of concern with. Could be crashes with animals, it could be something else, but let's pop a 2 in there. Okay. So I'll pause there. I've done exposure. I haven't yet got to likelihood and severity, but I'll see if there's anything that I need to deal with. Loretta?
Yeah, I think you may have covered it, but I'll just go over a question that came through. If we are worried about crashes involving pedestrians and motorcycles, where would these be? Would be in other?
Think about the road user that's going to be injured, and if we can define it in that sense of a pedestrian, a cyclist, or a motorcyclist, then it would be categorized in that. So if you're predicting a motorcyclist striking a pedestrian, and the pedestrian will be the one that's likely injured, that would sit in our pedestrian categorization. We'll be thinking about that. Okay. Good. I'll keep ticking along with this, and we'll have a stretch/coffee break shortly. But we go into then likelihood of crashes. The likelihood of crashes. Now, you can see here factors that sort of could influence the likelihood of crashes for these different crash types. Speed, geometry, shoulders, barriers, offset to hazard, guidance and delineation, etc. So it's not saying that that's the full list, but there's some examples of things. If we're thinking about pedestrians, design of any crossing facilities, the distance to cross, whether there's separation or not, so what's the distance of separation, number of conflicting directions, speeds, etc. So just the way you did in your assignment, thinking about all the factors out there that could influence the likelihood of crashes, we only asked you for 3 in the assignment, but in this one you list as many as you think you need to that are actually significantly contributing to the chance of a crash. And you'll dot point them out. You'll dot point out all the things you think are increasing the likelihood of crash, but also things that you think are good in the existing facilities, things that you think bring down the chance of a crash. So it could be that lower speed limit that's been put in place, or a refuge island, or good lighting, or good surface, or anything like that. So you list a whole lot of different things here. And we actually sort of put them into things that we think increase and then things that we think decrease. I'll show you an example of that shortly. And it's all about looking at that site and making this assessment and documenting it all yourself. And then you need to put a score to this. And while we were fairly objective with the scoring for exposure, when we get to likelihood, it becomes a little more challenging, because let's look at a 1 here. For a 1, to put a 1 for likelihood, it is highly unlikely that a given crash type will occur. 2, it is unlikely that a given crash type will occur. 3, it is likely that a given crash type will occur. So this isn't helping us a lot, is it? You can see how subjective this can be. A 4, though, the likelihood of individual road user errors leading to a crash is high given the infrastructure in place, e.g., high approach speeds to a sharp curve, priority movement control, filtering right turn across several opposing lanes, high speeds. So you're seeing some fairly inherent deficiencies in the intersectional length that are going to increase the likelihood of crashes. So you're going to make a judgment call on where you think it sits within this likelihood scale. For likelihood, to get a 0 is almost impossible. there is only minimal chance that a given crash type will occur for individual road use given the infrastructure in place. Only extreme driver behavior or substantial vehicle failure could lead to a crash. But that's, you're in there taking into account sort of human errors, not extreme driver behavior like police chase style extreme driver behaviors or substantial vehicle failures. We're talking major truck tire blowouts and the vehicle sort of rolling and these sort of things. I mean, we're talking within the likelihood of crash, we're taking into account just people falling asleep, being distracted, usual things that happen on a day-to-day basis, even going a little bit faster than they should. These are not extreme behaviors, right? So I've almost never put a crash likelihood at a 0. I've done ones, lots of ones where I think everything's really set up beautifully here, but I know people are going to fall asleep and be distracted and drop their coffee in their lap and all of these things that just happen. So there is still that chance that crash will happen. So you then make your judgment call, and I like to help people calibrate a little bit the scoring on this by saying, sort of think of it as a relative likelihood compared to other, other intersections in the area, in the region, in the country, and factor it in that way. And the big influences are going to be things like speed and sight distances and the control of the intersection, or the length of the road, the speed again, the surface conditions, whether there's good delineation and lighting and all of those things. So you'll come through and you'll make a judgment call, but you make a judgment call after you've dot pointed out lots of things to help you calibrate that. And you might say that you think it's a 2 here, and you think it's a 3 here, and you think it's a 4 here. You think it's quite likely because, maybe there's poor sight distances at an uncontrolled intersection and all sorts of other challenges. You might say, it's my marker. You might say 2. Pedestrians, you might say a 4 because there's no pedestrian facilities whatsoever. Okay, there are hardly any pedestrians there. We've already established that, but we're not doing this based on the numbers. We're doing it based on the facilities for an individual. Like, okay, it seems quite logical that they haven't invested big in pedestrian facilities because there's no pedestrians there, but this likelihood has completely taken out exposure. We're not thinking about the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians. Well, we're not thinking about the number of pedestrians. So if, this is not an uncommon scenario where you put a 1 there and a 4 there, because nobody's invested in that in the past. And maybe the same for cyclists and motorcyclists. Well, I mean, if you're getting a 4 here in intersections for other vehicles, you're likely to get a 4 for motorcyclists as well, because they're just going to be more at risk than any other road user, being smaller and more easily hidden, and their vulnerability to injury is going to be accounted for in severity. This is still just likelihood. I'll do the next one, and I think people are going to ask, a question that comes up a fair bit. I'm sorry, I've already seen it there. And the question is, can you use crash likelihood to determine these? Well, the answer is no, because, crash history. Crash history is the product of exposure and likelihood and severity. So where you can use, I suppose, crash history a little bit is to, once you get your final scores, you could check that you could check crash history and see if it generally aligns with that. But a safe system audit is not about crash history. It's about predicting future risk. And that could be that in the past that risk has presented itself with crashes. It could be that it hasn't yet. And often, very often for these safe system audits, it's associated with projects that are going to happen. So crash history is somewhat irrelevant then, because it'll be a different configuration. And yeah, so I would say crash history could be one of many data sets that provide you with some insights into a safe system audit, but by no means should it be a driving factor in anything associated with scoring or risk rating or the like. Okay, but yes, if you looked at it and you went, wow, okay, there's been 7 pedestrian crashes at this location in the past, there's obviously a lot of pedestrians and some risk there. And, how's this design going to cater for that? Then yes, that might help you with that input. But no, just to get our scoring for likelihood, we can't really use crash history as a driving factor. You would have to factor in there the exposure and the likelihood, and really the severity as well, and link that up. Okay, so severity then, we now have established, okay, this is all the number of people, then the chance that any individual will be involved in a crash based on the infrastructure in place. And then we say, how bad is it going to be? And you can see when we get to how bad it's going to be, speed, 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 speed. I mean, speed is your dominant a dominant part of your kinetic energy equations. It's a dominant part of injury biomechanics. It's going to be so influential in the outcome. But there's other things. So for these runoff road crashes, well, what are the roadside features? Have we got flexible barrier systems there, or have we got rigid poles, or have we got frangible poles, or have we got big open areas to run out into? Head-on crashes, we've got another vehicle involved now. Well, what's the weight and mass of some of these other vehicles coming the other way? Or do we have a lot of heavy vehicles? That's going to be more severe. Or what are the angles of crashes that are we going to crash at between vehicles? Is it going to be a nice angle where people bounce off, or is it going to be a very harsh angle? Pedestrians, we're really just pretty much stuck with speed. You could possibly, in some occasions, talk about the population of pedestrians you've got. If you were outside a retirement village or in a retirement village, then your severity of pedestrian strikes might go up significantly, because that even at some very low speeds, we're going to see some very serious injuries and deaths because of the frailty of that population. That's a bit rarer to be that specific, but it's something that could technically be factored in there. And cyclists' speeds and motorcyclist speeds. Again, things like what proportion are wearing helmets and the things might influence severity a little bit, but it's usually not enough to really contribute to alterations in your scoring. And then this is where you go to the crash severity part of the scoring reference sheet. Let's take a 2, for example. Should a crash occur, it is unlikely that it will result in fatality or serious injury to any road user involved. Kinetic energies are moderate, and the majority of the time are effectively dissipated before reaching the road user. So what does that mean? Okay, that means that maybe it hits a barrier and runs the energy out over time, maybe a crash cushion and impacts the energy, or maybe it's just low enough that it's going to hit the vehicle and its crumple zones, airbags, seatbelts and everything are going to be enough to stop it really reaching that road user. So if we go down to a 4 would be that it is highly likely that it will result in a fatality or serious injury to any road user involved. Now, this is where we sort of tried to make life a little bit easier with this colorful chart and scores. So you could sort of look for the crash that you're predicting, see where it sits within this. Think of the speeds that the bullet vehicle speeds are going to be, and then you can sort of draw your line, your 100 km/h head-on crash between cars. Well, it's going to be a 4. It's sitting up there. But if we have this sort of lower speed, you've predicted with some good traffic calming and slowing at different crossing points, we might have pedestrian versus car at these lower speeds, you might be down in the 2s or even the 1s. You can see it's not a distinct color change line there. It's a bit of a blur, and you make that judgment call. So you can see there how you're able to start to get a gauge for severity. But I do stress that you can use your professional judgment. There will be crash scenarios that aren't listed here. There's this blurred area where you're making a judgment call anyway, and you're thinking about sort of the speed of the crashes, and you're basing, yes, you might be thinking about operating speeds. You might be thinking about, well, speed limits, but then there's traffic calming and there's other features, and then you're thinking about it during congested times and non-congested times. So there's a lot to play into it, but you make a judgment call again, and you get to then add your determinations here into the matrix. So you maybe add a 2 here, and head-on goes to a 1 because that's, you can take more force in a head-on than a run-off road. An intersection might be a 2, other might be a 1 because side swipes you can do at quite high speed. And pedestrians, well, they might be a 3. And cyclists also might be a 3. And motorcyclists, maybe they're a 3 as well. So, and I'm doing this very quickly just to sort of demonstrate and illustrate what we're trying to achieve here and do. But you would spend a bit more time having a think about it, and then you would plonk your score in with some justification again. Okay, so we're coming up nicely on our timing here, and I want to just show you then what happened. Oh, sorry, Loretta.
No, that's all right. We've got a couple of questions, but just one on the scoring, which comes up a little. Just if you can break it down to, 1.5 or 1.75.
Okay, excellent question. You can give the first person to ask that a prize, because you're right, it's something that people do want to know.
And we also have another question, but I'll let you get to that one first.
Okay. So I was on the Austra's working group for this project where this was developed, and it was put forward with these numbering, and I said, wow, okay, we're going to give this to technical people. They're going to just run this off a cliff. They're going to come up with like 3 decimal places for each number. And the intention of numbers are just the same as your risk rating in any other risk rating, where you'd put a high, medium, low, very low, score. It's just you can't change it in your other risk matrix, or very occasionally I do see people put high/medium, so think of it from that perspective, that you can't go to that precision, nor should you. You've just seen that there's quite a bit of subjectivity with some of this, and quite big bands for the exposure and for the severity. You're making sort of these judgment calls. So we like to keep it to these big chunks. That being said, if you are absolutely stuck, and it's usually because 2 people in a team can't agree between a 2 and a 3 or something like this, we do allow a 0.5 to be used, but it's not a preferred thing to do. You usually try to sit it to you usually try to set it to whole numbers. So great question, and hope that clarifies things. So to a 0.5 would be your absolute most precision, but the preference is to be always sticking or trying to stick to a whole number. Thank you, Loretta. What was the next question?
Thank you. The next one was, should vehicle size be a severity factor for vulnerable road users as well as speed?
So vehicle size, to a degree. Okay, so I say to a degree. I mean, you'll have a look if you see our colourful chart. We've got pedestrian versus car, and we've got pedestrian versus heavy vehicle. So we know that the severity of the pedestrian versus heavy vehicle is going to be worse than pedestrian versus car. And so that really involves sort of run over. Okay. Pedestrian versus car usually is a strike, and the pedestrian goes over the car, and it's actually like it's a violent event, but it's less violent than being run over. Okay. Now, if we get into the territory of these sort of things that are categorized as cars somehow, but they're these massive four-wheel drivey ute sort of American Dodge things, okay, they are going to increase the severity a bit, but also the likelihood a bit because of the vision. And it's the same reason that heavy vehicles can influence the likelihood of cyclist crashes and pedestrian crashes, because they sweep. It's harder to see these vulnerable road users around them. So that kind of thinking is good to do, and it adds a bit to the precision that you're able to get as you fill out your scoring matrix. Thanks, Loretta. Okay, so we've filled this out. We've put lots of information in there. We're happy with it. And then what we do is we take each number and we multiply down. We multiply down. So we take 2 and we multiply it by 2 to get 4, by 2 to get 8, and we get a runoff road score of 8. Then we go to head on and we say 2 there, 2 times 3, so we're at 6 times 1, and we get the 6. So you can see there how we're able to then multiply these down. So to 24. And what do we got here? So sorry, I'm writing with my mouse, so it's taking a second. We've got 12, and 36. Okay, so I think I got that right. So you can see immediately there how we're getting a picture of where our highest risks sit. It's going to be motorcyclists, and that's very common that they're the highest overall. And then intersections in this one popped out. So we'd be very interested in that intersection. So then if you want to, you can create a total score for the whole project by adding up across the bottom. You add up your scores and you get a final score out of 448. So you can see then in the, and I'm going to give you a break in just a minute. You can see here in the template that Waka Kotahi provides, they give you this matrix, and it's a Word document, so you're able to grab it and start populating it yourself. But you can see there that they want you to put in lots of factors that influence the likelihood, that influence the likelihood of crashes, that increase the likelihood of crashes, that decrease the likelihood of crashes. factors that increase the severity of crashes, decrease the severity of crashes. Okay, so you're going to fill lots and lots of dots out here for each of these. And that's what our assessors, when you get to do your final assignment, are going to be looking for. Have they dot pointed things out here? Have they categorized them right? Are they all likelihood factors? Are they severity factors? And that's our indication that you've got your head around this. Exposure is pretty easy because it's just about the volume. Okay, I think that's time to take a 4-minute break and get a coffee, and we'll get back into it, okay? In 4 minutes. Okay, we'll get back into it. So you will be using this matrix in your final assignment for this course when you're doing the full safe system audit, because this is the first thing you do for the project. Now, you'll see there that we do start with the existing conditions always, as we've been talking about, existing conditions first. And you fill all of this out nicely, and you can see this one's been filled out. This one does have a couple of 0.5s, just obviously the team couldn't agree on the specifics. And you can see there a score of 118.5. Now, I saw a question had come in over the break there. Have I ever come across a perfect score of 448? Well, a score of 448 would be perfectly bad. Like that would be the worst alignment with safe system principles, because remember, the lower the score, the better. Have I ever seen a 448? No. Have I ever seen a 0? No. I've seen things up in the, up near and probably just in the 400, very high speed, high speed, uncontrolled intersections, multiple lanes, uncontrolled, bad sight distances, these sort of things, with, in sort of growth areas and the like. And it's just, going to be bad for all road users. And it's just like super heavily reliant on judgment and making no mistakes always. And if anything went wrong, it's very bad. Those are up in the high 300s usually, and the like. And the even 400s, and I've seen some pretty low scores, especially associated with things like assessments of bike shared paths and the like, and where they've got the shared path crossing roads, but it's done with raised priority crossings that are designed well. We're really down in very low territory there. So but never seen that absolute at either end. Okay, so existing conditions, you've gone through and you've filled all this out nicely. And my tip is to make sure you're happy with it. You're really comfortable. You've got everything down there, because what you're going to do is copy this whole table. You do a Control-C, you copy it, and then you paste it. Hang on, I'm doing the example here. Sorry. So this is the existing conditions matrix, and maybe we're talking about an intersection here, and it's existing characteristics, but they're planning a roundabout at that intersection, or a modified T with traffic signals, or a conventional T with traffic signals. So you've given these designs. So what you then do is you get that existing conditions matrix, and you copy it and you paste it for the design of the roundabout, and you then manipulate it, as in you cross parts of it out. You say, well, from the existing conditions, that's not relevant anymore. We've removed that as well, but we've added these features, which are maybe good features or bad features, and then we've changed the score. Got rid of those, added this, got rid of that, added these, So you actually use the existing conditions as your basis and show how it's changed. Then you go and you get the existing conditions and in matrix, you copy it again, you paste it, and you manipulate it for your next one, which is the modified T signalized intersection, using some icons here just so we know which ones we're talking about. Cross those out, add these new things, add these new things, change these, cross this out, new scores, change the color. You go then and you get the existing conditions matrix after you finish this one, and you do it for the next design option. And if they gave you 10 different options that they were thinking about, you would do a new matrix for each option. Then you're able to get the total score, and you can compare. So we can see here the existing conditions was 118.5. We say if they build the roundabout as they've designed it, it's going to go down to 90. The modified T99, the conventional T105. So best safe system alignment overall of the designs that we were given is the roundabout. You might present that in whatever way you want. Some people like to do that one overall in a graph. But this then helps us because every one of those, while they've all improved alignment with safe system principles, none of them was zero. So each still contains risk. So we're able to help the project team refine where that risk is coming from. And so they're then able to look at, okay, well, if we are going to do the roundabout, which is our best alignment with safe system principles as it stands, we might want to bring the cyclist down, and we might want to even think about pedestrians and getting that further down, and maybe where we're thinking about side swipes or rear ends or whatever we were thinking about. So you're then going to give them some ideas on how to bring some extra get some extra benefit out of whatever their designs are. And you do that for each design. So the roundabout, how could that be improved? Okay, well, they may end up deciding to do this still, and we could give them ideas on how this could be improved. And this one, they may end up at. So we give them ideas on each of them. Okay. Questions?
There's just a question that's come through. Would you score what the result would be if the recommendations of the SSA were recommended or implemented?
So that is an option. That would be on discussions with your client or whoever you're doing this for. What in practice often happens is that you do this, and then you give some recommendations. They select their option. They take whichever recommendations of additional things they can, and they proceed. But they could say, well, thank you. You gave us 10 recommendations for the roundabout. We can only do 5 of them for one reason or another. Can you tell us with those 5, what would the score be? And you can then, yes, provide them with another score based on what they would do. But I don't tend to do it just like say, all of my recommendations implemented, you will get down to this score. The reason for that is that it's very, very rare that they are able to implement all of your recommendations because they're dealing with pretty hard projects usually, and they've got constraints on budget and community expectation and cultural heritage issues, environmental issues, and then there's services and all sorts of challenges. So I would wait for them to tell me what they think they can do and what that would bring.
Thank you. A couple more. We do a lot of post-construction audits. What would your baseline existing option be if you haven't seen the existing?
Yeah, so you would do a retrospective scoring of the existing conditions. So you would have to go back and look at street view or past photos, or just generally what it the survey base or something from the original conditions. So yeah, to a degree, and this is a bit of a this is something a number of people have provided feedback to Waka Kotahi on, is that doing the safe system assessment, this part of a safe system audit in post-construction, kind of pointless, because this is talking about fairly big picture changes to scope. We want things to really alter, to improve. We want like addition of raised crossings, and we want separated bike facilities, and we want roundabouts at locations where they were just planning to do signal, big changes. So once you're at post-opening, like they're not going to change the whole intersection form. So this isn't providing a huge amount of value. What it can do, though, is validate, that this project in theory should be giving us safer outcomes. And you do that by looking back. Okay, what was it? And what is it now? And then there are your two scores. So you can see the relative improvement, hopefully. You may, in some cases, I hope we don't see this, but you may actually get out there at post-opening and go, right, look at existing conditions to now, and the scores have gone up, as in they made it more risky by doing this. And then I hope they would intervene with some other risk management.
Thank you. Just another one on the scoring. When would you score in 0.5 increments?
Yeah, so I mentioned one scenario where we do that, which is where members of your team can't agree between a 2 and a 3, or a 3 and a 4. And you just, to keep things moving on, split the difference. That's one reason. The other one, which I've used a few times, I don't use often, is if you believe that there's a treatment that provides some benefit, but it's not enough benefit to really give that whole number change. So I go, okay, that was a confusing sign, and they're going to fix that confusing sign. But I'm not convinced that that's enough for me to go from a 3 in the likelihood of crashes all the way to a 2. And I go, but it's good. Like it actually will help. I'm going to go with a 0.5 to just because I can't justify that full change. Now, part of the elegance of the assessment framework and these whole numbers is that you can't do little tweaks by putting up a warning sign and then saying you've solved the problem, because that doesn't change the score at all. Like you go, we'll do advanced warning at the intersection. You go, yeah, great. Okay, that's improved things like point something, which nobody will ever be able to give you an actual accurate percentage reduction on that, but it'll be very small. That doesn't change the score whatsoever. And that's a good thing, like in the sense that we say, we are not going to get our safe system outcomes by putting up warning signs. Like that's, it's in our lowest forms of control. Like we need substantial alterations to get these changes. And so that then is reflected in the safe system scoring. Okay. So that's the first part of our safe system assessment. And you'll get, of our safe system audit is the safe system assessment component. And you'll get some practice on doing that. But I want to now talk you through the next bit, which is we do that, we get this overall picture of the project, how well it's aligning, and you're starting to pick up some of the issues. But then you're going to take individual specific issues and you're going to flesh them out. And this is the road safety audit component of the safe system audit. So you do the safe system assessment, the big matrix, then you get into individual issues and you flesh them out. So I'm just going to use an example for this, and I'm going to walk it sort of step it through. So we've got this new intersection being created. It's on a high-speed road, and it's a new give-way controlled intersection. And you can see they're creating a left turn lane, a new right turn lane. Now, overall, our safe system assessment has thought through the exposure, the likelihood, the severity, thought holistically about this. And it would have picked out a few specific things. And now we're going to take some of those and flesh them on. And one specific I'm going to talk about is when a vehicle's turning left at this location, and we've got a vehicle waiting here to get out. And let me just show you in another intersection how this sort of looks. So you can see you've got a vehicle coming up to the hold line here. Hold line's up here. They're looking out there to see when they can give way. There's a truck that's entering the left turn lane. We've got a white car just on its shoulder there. And we'll go a little bit forward in time. And you can see there that the truck's now slowed right down to make its turn. And the white vehicle's accelerating past now. When we've got our silver vehicle just in front of us here, they'll be thinking, as soon as this white car's gone past, I'll be able to make my turn. But of course, the whole time, if we just go a little bit further forward in time, we see there'd been this other car masked behind the truck the whole time. And we do see a lot of crashes across New Zealand in this configuration. I say a lot. We see this happening. And we know that building that left turn lane in that configuration is going to create that dynamic visual obstruction. We call that a dynamic visual obstruction. It's a sightline impediment that's moving. So we actually write this up then. So we say for the intersection that we've got here, vehicles using the left turn lane may create a dynamic visual obstruction for motorists of the hold line looking for through vehicles. This increases the likelihood of right through side impact crashes involving vehicles turning out of the side road. The volume of vehicles on both roads is low, which reduces the likelihood of the crash. However, the proportion of larger vehicles turning into Epsom Barnworth Road is high, which increases the chance of dynamic visual obstruction occurring. The design is consistent with Austroads and, well, this one was in Victoria, Vic Roads design guidance. The auditors believe it still presents a safety issue. Okay. So you can see that, and then there's a nice little snip and a diagram here. This is a really good practice way of formulating an audit finding. And I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to formulate it. I'm going to turn it into a formula or a recipe for you. And this is what we want to see when you are writing up the audit findings. So you're taking one of those specific issues and you're fleshing it out. So the red part here is the issue. You've actually described the issue you're concerned with. The yellow part is the crash itself, actually specifying the crash that could happen. The blue is starting to add in factors that increase or decrease the risk associated with that specific issue. And the purple is any standards or guidelines if applicable. But we're not saying that you have to put this in. And we're not saying that it's all about, meeting standards and guidelines, because like this one, for example, this one's even just saying, hey, yeah, we know you met standards and guidelines, but it's still a risk. So that one's actually just clarifying it. You don't need to put anything in there. But then also this little diagram, the snip, the photo, something there. This is wonderful and really helps out for anybody receiving this report, because you can look at that and really get an idea of what they're talking about, where they're talking about it, without even having to read all of this. And okay, this one might have been a bit more obvious, but when you're talking about, the culvert at Chainage 250.56 on the southeast side, and they're like, oh, which one are they talking about? Right. If you've got a snip of it and they can see it, it's their design. They go, yep, I know exactly where we're talking about. Okay, I can look into that. So this formula becomes important. And again, here's my little tip for getting good scores in this course. When you're picking a specific issue and you're writing it up, follow the formula. Doesn't matter how obvious it is in your mind, say for the crash. Say you go, your issue is, there is insufficient sight distance for a pedestrian crossing at the crossing from the east side to the west side. Okay, it's blindingly obvious to you that you're talking about a pedestrian being struck, but you'd say this increases the chance that a pedestrian will be struck crossing the road. Like, you specify it. Then you talk about risk factors. It could be this will be worse at night because the lighting's also poor, or this is worse outside of peak times because vehicle flows are faster, or whatever, or the skid resistance is also bad, which factors in there to, make it worse. And then, you might say in this one, this does not meet the Audit's Guide to Road Design, sight distance requirements for pedestrian crossings, and then you've justified it actually with a standard and guideline. Or you may say this meets the Audit's Guide sight distance requirements. The auditors still believe this is an issue, which is fine. Or you might leave that out altogether. And then you'd probably have a picture of this, or a snip from the design, or a photo from the driver's perspective, or a snip off your dash cam footage when you've done some drive-throughs, or whatever it is, to really highlight that's where the issue is. Follow the formula. Now, risk we talked about for the safe system assessment component. The first part was exposure and likelihood and severity. When we get to the road safety audit part, we're just using a standard risk matrix for these specific issues we've grabbed and refined, and we do probability times severity, and we use the new risk matrix from the Waka-Kotahi guidelines. And this is an interesting one. This is, again, another one that there's a bit of controversy about, but it looks at the chance of the crash and the severity of outcome. And it has very likely, unlikely, very unlikely, and we've got non-injury, minor, serious, or fatal. And you've got some information about what each of these are as you go along. But to get to your risk score, you say, well, I think that crash at the pedestrian crossing is unlikely, but when it happens, it's going to be serious based on the speeds and things. So we've got a significant risk. So the risk is the colored one. You can see it's colored and that orange for significant, red for serious. So you make your judgment call on that. Now, there was in the previous Waka-Kotahi guide some information about this, which is dropped out, but sort of very likely you're thinking the crash of the severity you're predicting is going to happen once a year or so, and very unlikely sort of once every 10 years or so is where we're thinking for that. If you say, well, this is, this might happen, but it'd be like once every 50 years, well, that wouldn't even make your risk matrix. It doesn't even, it's not enough to even enter into the report. So you can help get a bit of guidance on your severity outcomes by using these graphs, using the information that you've got in terms of biomechanics of injury, what you would expect, and just use your judgment on what you think the outcomes might be. So the line here is probably a good indication of, like to the right of these points here, you really be thinking in the significant injury for that crash type. So then you put in your level of risk. So very unlikely, fatal, significant. Now there was a line here. It's just talking about safe system thresholds, which is saying that to the right of this, serious and fatal, to the left of this are things we don't want to happen, but we can live with them. So you put a risk rating in. And then we come up with recommendations again, like we're coming up with more recommendations, and we categorize these into primary recommendations or supporting. Now, I'm going to put little handles on this because I want you to think of these as buckets or baskets of, or bags of treatments. There could be in the primary treatment, we've got roundabouts and raised crossings and continuous flexible barrier systems. And then supporting, we've got lighting improvements, surface improvements, we've got line marking, we've got warning signs, we've got traffic signals, right? It's not about saying that this is my number one and this is my number two, even though it says primary, but these, you could recommend 3 primary treatments, or you could recommend no primary treatments and all supporting treatments. Like, just think of them as buckets, and they're really flagging, hey, these primary ones, they're going to virtually eliminate fatal and serious injuries associated with that crash type. These supporting ones, they're not going to virtually eliminate, but they're going to do a good job. They're going to improve the overall level of safety, but they're not a big ticket, get us close to that vision zero we're talking about, but they're good things to do. And the safe system assessment framework lists those, and we've got that in the learning management system to assist you, and we'll be able to show you that when you're trying to categorize these. But for this one, for example, we're saying here, okay, implement measures to reduce the speed and or angle of impact of this location. This could be achieved with a roundabout, which we're saying is one of those primary ones. If they put a roundabout in here, we're not going to have this right angle crash at that fatal or serious injury speed. That's our primary treatment. But we're kind of being realistic here in the sense that there's a fair chance that they wouldn't be able to afford a roundabout, or it's not what they've got funding for, all of these other challenges. So we say, if this cannot be achieved, implement measures to improve the overall sightlines of this location, such as increasing the offset of the left turn lane. That's a supporting treatment. Relocating the hold line forward, provided they can be done so safely. But if we were to increase the offset of the left turn lane here, right? So we push the left turn lane down to here. And then, so that vehicle is now offset, sitting in there. That's opened up the sight lines. Okay, we've probably met our sight distance requirements. So why is that not a primary treatment? Well, the reason it's not a primary treatment is because if you think about the crash we're worried about, it can absolutely still happen at the same severity. The crash was vehicle coming out here, getting struck by vehicle coming through here. Okay, it was more likely to happen when there was this dynamic visual obstruction issue, but we removed that. This vehicle can still make a bad judgment call, and this vehicle is traveling along, and we still have the crash. It's less likely to happen, but it can still happen at the same severity. Okay, so it's not a primary outcome. The roundabout at this location is, though, because that right angle crash is, it virtually eliminates vehicle to vehicle right angle style death and serious injury. The crashes are lower speed and far more friendly to happen. So we're virtually eliminated by doing that. So that's the sort of makeup of a audit finding. And I'll take questions in just a second. My colleagues, I was reviewing an audit report. I wasn't actually part of the audit team, but I was reviewing this one. as a sort of peer review, and they had the same issue came up because people keep building these left turn lanes, and they recommended an offset, and they actually just sort of sketched up what could be done, and they added a bike lane through because they'd actually got another issue in the audit where there was a bit of concern for bikes through the area, and they sort of getting both done at once. I thought that was a neat way to do it. That's not a primary solution. That's a supporting solution, but I thought it was kind of a neat way to do things. So a little tip, for something to be a primary treatment, come out of that primary bucket, it's got to either address the consequence of the crash, like that roundabout or the continuous barrier system, or it's got to virtually eliminate it. And that's like we're talking about things like grade separation and the like. But you've got to factor general human error and failure into your thinking when we're talking about eliminating. So it's very hard to get a primary treatment unless you are actually getting speeds within tolerable limits or angles or managing energy. And in the Safe System Audit template from Wakapatahi, it's set up like this, where you sort of write out your information in here. You've got some drop-down menus, which give you your risk rating up here, the severity there, the likelihood there. So you're going to drop these down. You're going to write in here. You're going to put your SNP in here and your recommendation. So you write it all out. And you just do that over and over again. Okay, Loretta, questions?
Yeah, we've had a few good sort of contributing comments come through, which is great. But the questions are, should the audit recommendation for primary treatment roundabout be providing a judgment how suitable that would be? Example, low side road volume.
Okay, so you have to do things within a general realm of possibility, but I always like to push a bit. Okay, the reason you saw there, I said roundabout, well, that audit team said roundabout, or here's some other options, is you don't want to make the call on behalf of the client on what they can and can't do. Okay, you don't know whether they actually have some extra money or they actually, want to rebid for funding. They might tell you some of this, but you should push to have the safest outcome in there. But some other options, if they can't do that, you're still getting some improvement. But then again, okay, so you've got, if you had really unbalanced flow, would a roundabout be appropriate? Well, possibly not. But maybe you could meter the roundabout. You could meter, you might have other reasons you want to do it. But yes, you are being engaged for some of your technical expertise around safety, but also practicality of being able to address these safety issues. So, there's extreme examples where, if you're doing a residential street and you're looking at an intersection, you're not going to recommend like a grade separation, a flyover. It's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars and acquire all of these houses. I mean, it's just, so ridiculously out of context that you wouldn't do it. But, you'll make a judgment call as to where you sit. I just say that push for better safety with some lesser things that they could do if they can't achieve that best one. But yes, use your judgment. The other thing is that most of you have expertise in a variety of areas, and you might be a drainage expert, and you might identify things that are associated with drainage that are not really safety issues. Okay, they don't actually sit in here, but you can assist by putting some notes in the appendix or the like. But also, again, your recommendations can be somewhat cognizant of some of the stuff In the end, it's up to them. But they decide what to do. You could, in theory, provide no recommendation. Okay, it'd be a bit weird, but you could say, this is the issue. The auditors are unsure of the best way to lessen this risk. That would be legitimate in an audit, and it would be consistent with Austroads. The client would probably go, well, hang on, a little help here. Well, they might actually like it because, they can then address it the way they want.
And on that, would speed management be a primary treatment?
So speed management is a primary treatment if, and it will be quite dependent. A speed management will be a primary treatment if it brings speeds under the threshold limit for that crash type. So 100 km/h road with an intersection, a give-way controlled intersection, speed limit down to 80 km/h is not a primary treatment. It's a supporting treatment. You're not getting to, so that as in a regulatory speed limit reduction, you're not getting to within the threshold speeds we're talking about, which is 50. However, if you had a road with a speed limit of 60 and you did some local area traffic management down the road to bring speeds down to 50 or 40, and you had that at-grade intersection, then that's a primary treatment because you've got the operating speeds down to below the safe system threshold for that one. I suppose it's the same for the higher one. If you did some traffic calming features on the approach to that, you're traveling on 100, you started to calm traffic down significantly to get through the intersection, then it's a primary treatment, the same way the roundabout does. So I hope that explains it. But speed limits on their own are rarely a primary treatment but they can be, I suppose, if you're taking areas and your speed limit will genuinely bring operating speeds down under one of those threshold limits. Okay, ticking along nicely here, and hopefully I'll give you a little bit of time to do your quiz. Okay, here's a poor example of the wording of a finding. Right turn bay is too narrow. Okay, what right turn bay? Where? Why is it too narrow? What's the risk? What's the crash that could happen? Fair one would be, right turn bay from main road to side road is too narrow. The concern is increased by the potential side and rear end crashes. Austroads has some specifics on that. But, what we're thinking of excellent here, you can see it's fleshed out. We've got the nice snip. I now know exactly which right turn bay we're talking about, and I can see what's going on. And it's being done there in the formula of issue, crash that could happen, risk factors, and standards and guidelines if they're applicable. So really that formula, that recipe, the snip, pointing at it, we can see what's wrong there. It's too narrow a right turn bay, and it's going to cause some rear end crashes and potentially sideswipe crashes, and going to be worse in wet weather and at night, and doesn't meet the Austroads guidance, which talks about a 3.3 meter minimum. Okay, just one more on this primary and supporting, and then I'll open it up to any final questions, and then maybe Loretta might jump into the learning management system just to remind people of where we're at. Just this final one, I'll do it with a nice little road here, and they're proposing some parking, and we are worried about sight distance for a vehicle waiting, that this parking is going to block sight distance. So we've identified it, we write it up. That could increase the chance of a vehicle getting struck coming out here, and put in, so that's the crash type. Risk factors, well, it's going to be worse when there's high parking demand, and maybe at night and other bits and pieces. And you might talk about standards and guidelines. But then you risk rate it, then you make your recommendation. Now, if your recommendation is to remove the parking or remove some of the parking, remove the parking to just back here. So we've start the parking back here. So we've opened up the sight lines beautifully. That is a supporting treatment. Okay, yes, you've got rid of the issue you were talking about, but we're thinking about the crash. The crash can still occur. Same speed, same angle, same severity. So the removal of that parking is a supporting treatment. What would be a primary treatment in this location? Well, again, we could talk about a roundabout would be one, or we could talk about raised intersection, slowing vehicles to within those threshold speeds. We could talk about closing the intersection altogether. So at this location, that would be a primary treatment. You think about where you're going to push vehicles to. But signalizing this, signals, is a supporting treatment again, because we know people will run the red light. Okay. Now, you might, in this location and in this scenario, say, I don't think that any of those are practical. They're the primary ones. I don't think they are. I don't think it can be done. And you might just say, remove parking, or, do curb outstands and move the whole line. What do you call them? Curb build outs in New Zealand. Curb build out, push that out, parking there. That's my recommendation. That's supporting, and that's all I'm providing. I'm not providing a primary treatment. You don't have to provide a primary treatment, but it's nice if you can, but you are fully able to just say, there's my idea. It's a supporting treatment. Okay. So I've got through what I wanted to cover today. So that's good. I'll throw it over to Loretta to maybe just show you in the learning management system where we're at, and maybe point at those resources. So you can have a look at that safe system assessment framework for the categorization if we need.
Thank you. All right, back in the learning management system. So we're on module 3. So not much to do, just a quiz really, but also making reference to Ken mentioned earlier where to find the assessment framework. So if you click on there, that will take you to the document. So the Safe System Assessment Framework document. So you can...
If you can go down to about page 14 or so. I think it's about page 14 or 15. So there's a bit of background information in here, and then keep going. There we go. Okay, any of these. So you can see these colored charts. These are based. So the table heading is head-on crashes for this one. You can see. So this saying that's the crash type. And here's some primary treatments in the green: one-way traffic, flexible median barrier, and the like. And then the next two, the yellow and the orange, they are supporting. There used to be 2 categories of supporting, but we've kind of abandoned that. It's too confusing. So both are supporting. And you can see that there's, big wide medians. Well, that's supporting, because we know people are going to get across even a big wide median, and they're still going to have head-on crashes. There'll be far less of them. And then we've got other ones in there as supporting audio tactile, centerline, and like. Down the bottom are just other considerations which don't really sit in our assessment framework matrix, but they might be other things from a holistic road safety perspective that we could think about. So I just wanted to point you with that. Even in the right-hand column there, you can see exposure, likelihood, and severity. So that helps you out if you're confused by that as well. But these don't cover off every single treatment. Okay, they're just a few ideas, help you get your head around that categorization. Thank you. You can jump back into the LMS now.
Thank you. Pretty straightforward, just the quiz today. So module 3 quiz, clicking on there and completing the questions. I think there's maybe 10 questions. Yep, so 10 questions and yep, just submitting that. And that's all there is for module 3.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So jump into that, have a go at it. As always, if you go through that and you really struggle and you think, oh, don't stress about it. Simply shoot Loretta an email, training@safesystemsolutions.com.au. We'll organize a bit of one-on-one coaching for you. We can go through some of the key learnings, the key outcomes, and you'll be feeling much more comfortable in your second attempt at it. But I think most of you are getting a good handle on this, and you can get stuck into it. Your marks will come through for your assignment soon. You'll also get feedback. So if there's anything you still need to improve on, you'll be able to do that. But you've got 5 minutes now, so you can knock that quiz off and be ready for our next session on Friday, is it? Must be.
It is on Friday. Yep, it's just a comment that's come through. Sorry, just quickly, there is an error in the scoring for motorcyclists on page 58 in the SSA framework. We'll have to look at that. But thank you.
What's the... Oh, okay. I'll have a look at that.
We'll have a look at...
In the Ostrich document, I assume?
The SSA framework document.
Okay. Page 58. Okay. Okay, yeah, it's a prize for sure.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ken.
All right. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.